Welcome. Thank you for watching this teaching video from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. Please check out our other videos and don't forget to like and subscribe. Our mission is to help people come to know Jesus better and love Him more every day. We believe this will not only help our own spiritual growth, but also help us better influence the community and the world for Christ. For more information about Oak Tree, please visit us at oaktreechurch.com. There you'll find past message series, online giving options, and more information about our discipleship process that we call The Path. Now enjoy this message. We'd love to hear from you in the comments or the website contact form. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. So, I guess I could just start it here. So, this is the last of our self-control series for today, for the whole series. So, we've been going through the spiritual calendar, and we are exiting spring next week. Next week we'll be in summer. Doesn't feel like it out there, but we'll be in summer. In spring, we're feeding and developing the root, and it's still mostly internal, so most of your development in springtime is all, down in the roots. So, and this is where we are with self-control. Self-control is when we actively choose to do what we're studying in the Bible, and it's where we start to become what He wants us to be and do what He wants us to do. So, our next character that we're going to study today is Gideon. He's one of my favorite characters in the book of Judges, so this one was actually kind of a fun one to do. So, in the 6th chapter where his story starts, they give a very blunt statement about the condition of Israel. Basically, they say, the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight, so the Lord turned them over to Midian for 7 years. It doesn't really get more straightforward than that. They were being very naughty. They were worshiping idols. They were doing bad things. They were worshiping the fertility cults and all of the naughtiness that goes in with that. And they were just being bad. So God turned His back on them, and it became really terrible. Okay, how bad was it? It was really, really bad. In chapter 6, we read, starting in verse 2, the Midianites overwhelmed Israel. Because of Midian, the Israelites made shelters for themselves in the hills, caves, and strongholds. So they're not even living in the towns. I mean, they're trying to hide out from these guys. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and the people from the east would attack them. They invaded the land and devoured its crops all the way to Gaza. They left nothing for the Israelites to eat, and they took away all the sheep, oxen, and donkeys. When they invaded with their cattle and tents, they were as thick as locusts. Neither they nor their camels could be counted. They came to devour the land. Israel was so severely weakened by Midian that the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help. So it's bad. I mean, really bad. Okay, in a minute we'll talk about the army that comes the next time. It's 135,000 soldiers in this army. They're huge. And they describe them like locusts, so you can't even count. I mean, they're trying to count. Wait, I think I counted that guy twice. You just can't count them. There's just too many people. But Israel was being bad. They were being naughty. They were doing what they weren't supposed to be doing. They weren't following God. They were worshiping Baal. And so God turned His back on them for a little short time because He wanted them to, stop doing what they're doing and come back to Him. So even though they were left to their own devices for a little while, God was not done with them. God's never been done with His people. He will never be done with His people. He will always be around for His people. But now He was going to send somebody to get them out of the trouble that they were in. So what He does at one point is He sends an unnamed prophet. He's so obscure we don't even have his name. But He sends an unnamed prophet to Israel and tells them, hey, stop following the gods of the Amalekites, okay? You guys got to stop doing this. This idolatry is killing you. So all of Israel has heard this message already. So our story starts with our man Gideon. He's threshing wheat. So basically what he's doing is he's trying to separate the wheat from the chaff so he can eat it. But he's doing it in a wine press. So because it was so bad, he didn't want to actually give away that he was out there, gathering food. So he's doing this in a wine press where he can do this in secret. Okay, normally when you thresh, the threshing floors are up on top of hills. You beat out the wheat and then you can let the chaff go and fly away with the wind, and then you can collect the wheat. He's doing it in a wine press, which normally they would build down at the bottom of the hills so that they could contain the juice. Okay, so he's down in there like, threshing my wheat. Okay. And then the angel of the Lord visits him. This is a pre-incarnate Christ who comes and visits Gideon, and he sees him threshing the wheat in the wine press, hiding out, and he addresses him as, "The Lord is with you, courageous warrior." Okay? So Gideon, he immediately launches into this speech. I didn't even put it up here. It's not worth reading. But he launches into the speech about, how can God, be with us? We're all oppressed and terrible things are happening, and, this is just really bad. But at this point, he should have known. The unnamed prophet already told people, hey, stop worshiping the idols. He should have already known why they were being beaten up by the Midianites, because they had turned their back on God, so he wasn't protecting him. So the angel of the Lord, he goes right into it. And in verse 14, he says, "Then the Lord himself turned to him and said, 'You have the strength. Deliver Israel from the power of the Midianites. Have I not sent you?' Well, then now he launches into this, I'm from the tribe of Manasseh, and we're the weakest clan, and I'm the youngest person. How could I possibly save Israel? Doesn't even address that, just sidesteps it and go right to 16. And the Lord said to him, but I will be with you. You will strike down the whole Midianite army. So he's telling him, don't worry about it. I got your back, dude. Okay, I'm going to get you. But you got to do this. So Gideon, he ends the conversation with verse 17. Gideon said to him, if you really are pleased with me, then give me a sign as proof that it is really you who is speaking with me. So at this point, I don't know if Gideon thinks he's hallucinating or just talking to himself. I mean, he doesn't know if he's really talking to God, so he's asking him for a sign. But he doesn't just ask him for a sign. He does something a little different here. So what he does is he goes and gets he asks the angel of the Lord to wait for a minute, I'll be right back. This wasn't going to be fast. He goes and finds a young goat, kills it, starts cooking it, and then he goes and he picks up an ephah of flour to make unleavened bread. Now, an ephah is basically 8 gallons of flour, So he's making a whole goat and 8 gallons of flour, So he's making a big meal, all right? When this wasn't just any meal, this is the meal that you would give to somebody when you had an honored guest arrive. You would make all this food, and then you would present it to your honored guest to make them feel special and know that they're honored. So he's making this special meal for God, and he cooks it all up, so obviously this has been taking a little while because, bread doesn't just cook over, in a minute. And they don't have microwaves at this time. So Gideon comes and he presents this feast to the angel of the Lord, all right? And then the angel of the Lord says, okay, go ahead and place it on this rock. So he's got the meat in the basket, and then he puts the bread on top of it. And then he's got, this broth that he got when he was cooking. The angel tells him to pour that over the bread. So he pours it over the bread on the rock, And then what happens is the angel of the Lord just simply takes his staff, touches it, poof, gone. And then he disappears. So while Gideon was asking him for a sign, he was actually showing God honor first by having prepared the meal, And when the meal disappears, suddenly Gideon's very afraid. He's like, oh no, I was just speaking to God. He really was God. So the angel of the Lord assures him, like, don't worry, you're not going to die. You're not going to die. You're going to be okay. I'm going to be with you. So even though he was doubting, he first showed honor to God before he asked for a sign. It wasn't like, back when people were asking Jesus for signs, hey, do something funny for me, or do a parlor trick, or, turn these, this staff into a snake or something. No, he actually was showing honor by presenting the meal and then sacrificing it and then, allowing God to just take the entire thing. So even though he starts as doubt, as like the doubting Thomas, he actually does show some faith in all of this. Okay? So, Gideon is going to raise an army. However, there's a problem, and it's something that God has to deal with before he can send Gideon out as his judge. Okay? Because he has to first make sure Gideon's doing what he's supposed to be doing before he can tell everybody else, do what you're supposed to be doing, and then we can defeat the Midianites. So before the story can go any further, they literally have to go into his backyard and deal with the problem. And the problem is that his own father has an altar set up to Baal and an Asherah pole. Okay? So, I missed a slide. There we go. Okay, so before he can deal with it, he has to get rid of this stuff, okay? So the angel of the Lord says, get a bull, get 2 bulls. One of them has to be 7 years old, okay? He says, get a bull, pull down the altar of Baal, just completely pull it down, cut down the Asherah pole, okay? And then what I want you to do is I want you to take that second 7-year-old bull, which also corresponds with the 7 years that they've been under persecution by the Midianites. I want you to take that bull and sacrifice on a new altar that you build to me. And I want you to use the pole to burn it, okay? So the Asherah pole, what that was is, it was a special pole. They used to set these up near all these Canaanite religious sites. We don't really know exactly what it looks like because they don't have them today and they never preserved one. But it was some sort of pole that they used to venerate Asherah, who was the mother goddess of the Canaanite, pantheon. Along with their creator god El, created 70 gods. So she was the goddess of fertility. So it's a fertility cult. Baal was also involved with fertility. He was also involved with lightning and storms. So all, fertility worship. So what I love about this story is God instructs him to pull down the high places for Baal and then cut down this pole that they're worshiping this thing. They're giving it sacrifice. And he says, I want you to cut this pole down, and you're going to use it to make my sacrifice. What's sacred to them is not. It's just firewood. You're going to use that to burn my sacrifice and then offer it to me. So he's going to do this, but the problem is he's afraid of the men of the city, and he's afraid of his father's family. So he tells the angel of the Lord, okay, I'll do this, but I'm going to do this in the dead of night. I'm not doing this, when people can see me. So he does it. He gets the bulls, he pulls down the altar, he cuts down the pole, he sacrifices the bull, and he does a burnt offering. So in a burnt offering, everything is consumed. Everything, you get nothing back from it. So you're giving God everything except for the animal hide. They would take that off. And fun fact, there were several animals you could sacrifice, for sins and other things. The bull was the most expensive one that you could sacrifice. This was like the big offering. So the rich people would do this. So here it is. They're suffering from the Midianites. They don't have enough food. He's already used 8 gallons of flour for God, and now he's going to sacrifice the family bull. So he's giving up a lot here. But he goes ahead and does it, and then all he can do is wait for the aftermath. So in the aftermath, the men come out, and they're looking around, and they're trying to figure out what happened to it. What happened to our altar? What happened to the pole? So they're asking around, and they somehow figure out it was Gideon that did it. So now they want to get Gideon. So they tell him, hey, bring your son out, and we want to kill him. So in verse 31, we read, but Joash said to all those who confronted him, must you fight Baal's battles? Must you rescue him? Whoever takes up his cause will die by morning. If he really is a god, let him fight his own battles. After all, it was his altar that was pulled down. So it's kind of interesting. It's like here he is. He's got the Baal worship in his backyard. his son destroys it, and he's like, let this guy fight his own battles. He's God, right? He can take care of himself. He's a big boy. Okay? So it seems to me like even though this was going on in Joash's own backyard, it doesn't seem like this was something he was probably supporting. It's probably more like his family was into this, and he was just going along to get along. So when Gideon pulls it down, it doesn't seem like he sheds a single tear for this sacred site. So I think it's kind of interesting that he just kind of blows it away and goes like, yeah, well, it's gone now. Good. And it's funny because when you read in the Bible, in verse 27, he says he didn't do it because he was too afraid of his father's family and the men of the city. So I don't think really the father was too terribly involved in this Baal worship, although he was going along with it. Joash goes ahead and he renames his son for having done this. In verse 32, Joash renames his son Jerub. That very day, Gideon's father named him Jerubbaal because he had said, let Baal fight with him, for it was his altar that was pulled down. So at this point, even though Gideon said he didn't know why God wasn't with us, he's now doing what he's supposed to be doing. He's getting rid of the idol worship. So now he can call the men of Israel and form an army because in his own backyard, they've gone and actually taken the stuff out and put a new altar in for God. So now he can go ahead and he can start summoning the army. So the Holy Spirit takes control of Gideon, and he blows a horn and starts summoning men from Israel to start gathering. Sends out messengers all over the place to the different tribes and says, hey, send men, we're going to go fight. So they all meet up on the Mount of Gilead. So at this point, Gideon's fears start to re-manifest because here it is. He's getting all these people, they're starting to show up. And, there's some time passing because, people didn't just, appear out of nowhere. You didn't have cars to drive there, so they all had to walk or get on their horse and ride to them. So they're starting to gather. There's 32,000 Israelites that are going to gather here. So he starts to get kind of worried. He's like, did I really hear from God? Did he really tell me that? So he goes and he asks God for another sign. Okay? So a little bit of time passed. He's asking God, I'm not really sure if I'm supposed to be doing this. So here's what I'm going to do. God, I'm going to take a wool fleece. I'm going to take this wool, and I'm going to set this down on the threshing floor overnight. And what I'm asking you to do is go ahead and take this fleece, and I want the fleece to be wet and the ground to be dry. And then if that's true, then I will accept this, that you have called me to lead this army. So God says, okay, I'll do it. So he sets the fleece out overnight, comes in the next morning, takes the fleece. The ground is completely dry, and the fleece is so wet that he can actually wring it out and fill an entire bowl with the water that's in the fleece. But this doesn't quite satisfy Gideon. So he asked for another sign. And I think what happened is that when Gideon asked for the sign, he sort of asked for the wrong thing the first time. Because wool kind of tends to gather dew, and the ground could be dry, and the wool could be wet. Now, the wool was wet to the point where it was wringing. I mean, he had to wring it out to get it, to get out all the water. So I think God had fulfilled his request the first time, but then he asked for another sign. He says, well, this time make the ground wet and the fleece completely dry. So he goes ahead, he goes to bed, comes back out the next morning, and what ends up happening is the fleece is dry, the ground is wet. So now he's like, you know what? I guess I am supposed to lead the army. That doesn't say that. It doesn't really actually say anything. It just immediately switches from him asking for a sign to now God is going to right-size Gideon's army. 32,000 men have showed up, okay? And it's too many. God's like, it's too many people. You guys are going to do this, and then you're going to say, we did this on our own. So in verse 2 The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men for me to hand Midian over to you. Israel might brag, 'Our own strength has delivered us.' Now announce to the men, 'Whoever is shaking with fear may turn around and leave Mount Gilead.'" 22,000 soldiers went home. 10,000 remained. What I thought was kind of interesting about this part is, and I didn't realize this till I did the study, which is why I like doing some of these, because you actually learn a lot more. And one of the things I found was in Deuteronomy chapter 20, there's a list that Moses gives of all these reasons why you don't have to fight the battles, like you married somebody, you planted a vineyard. And at the very end, it says in verse 8, it says, well, if you're afraid, don't compel the men to fight because they're just going to make the other people afraid. Seems like an easy out, like you show up and go, okay, I'm here to fight. Yep, no, I'm too afraid. I'm going home. It seems like an easy out. I mean, it kind of seems funny that he has a whole list of reasons where people don't have to fight. But then I thought about it. It's like, he doesn't really need them to fight. He just needs them to show up. He needs them to obey him. So the part of the obedience is they show up to fight. If they're too afraid to fight, then God's like, I can do this on my own, but if you really can't fight, just go home and don't scare the rest of these guys. They've got it. So I thought that was kind of interesting that was in there. So at this point, God tells him, you still got too many people. Gideon's like, really? They have 135,000 people. It's 1 to 135. No, they're 10,000, yeah. They got to kill like 14 people, each guy. He's like, we don't have enough people. So God's like, nope, still too many. So even though 2/3 of them had deserted him out of fear, the Lord again says to him, there are still too many men. Bring them down to the water, and I will thin the ranks some more. When I say this one should go with you, pick him to go. When I say this one should not go with you, do not take him. So they take him down to the river, and everyone starts to drink. The vast majority of people get down on all fours, and they stick their head in the water, and they drink. 300 of them don't do that. What they do is they either kneel or stand, they scoop water up, and then they hold it to their face while they're drinking. Okay? We don't really get an idea of why God does this to thin the people out. We only know that only 300 men cupped the water and brought it up to their face. Okay? There's a couple speculations in Constable's notes, and one of them is that getting down on all fours and drinking means that you're not being very careful. So, like when everyone just rushes up to the water, if they had been attacked, it would have been, they would have been in a vulnerable position. So it's possible God rooted them out because they're not careful. Whereas the 300 were very careful about, scooping the water and making sure, hey, I can see, I can fight, I can, reach my sword. But maybe they just lacked confidence. And maybe that's what God wanted. He didn't want people that were, mighty men of valor. He wanted people who probably lacked confidence because he's going to defeat them. It's his power. It's not the power of the people. God's going to show through these 300 men his might, okay? So I kind of think that's the reason why he thinned it down to those 300, was because they were just, they didn't want to commit to getting down on all fours and drinking. So either way, what happens, God concludes this encounter by reassuring Gideon that he's going to deliver Midian to him. Now, and I think this is why God gave him the two signs, because he knew that he was going to take 32,000 and whittle it down to 300. Okay? So he already knows where Gideon's going with this. So probably to keep Gideon from abandoning him, and be like, this was more than I asked for, he gave him the two signs. So Gideon's still holding on to that. He's still holding on to the sacrifice. He's still holding on to these two signs. But right now, with 300 soldiers, that's 450 to 1. That's terrible odds. That's really, really terrible odds, okay? So they're going into a battle, and it doesn't look like it's going to be much of a battle, okay? But God's with them. Because God's with them, it's going to be a really bad time for the Midianites. So that same night that he whittles down all the soldiers, God tells Gideon, get up and go fight. So probably because he knew that he probably didn't have enough fortitude to last for any longer than what he was at. So he immediately's like, nope, we're going to go to battle tonight. Get your guys and let's go. But as soon as he tells them to attack, he gives them a caveat. Let's see here. He gives them a caveat. He says, if you're afraid, it's okay. Go down to the camp with one of your soldiers, okay, one of your servants, and go listen to what the Midianites are saying, okay? So see what they're saying and see, that this will give you some courage. So he goes down to the camp with his servant, and he finds two guards talking. One guard is telling the other guard about his dream. So in verse 13, we read, when Gideon arrived, he heard a man telling another man about a dream he had. The man said, look, I had a dream. I saw a stale cake of barley bread rolling into the Midianite camp. It hit a tent so hard it knocked it over and turned it upside down. The tent just collapsed. The other man said, without a doubt, this symbolizes the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God is handing Midian and all the army over to him. As soon as Gideon hears this, he praises God, and then he's right back to his troops. He's like, yeah, we're going to make this happen. So in that time, dreams, especially people who were like kings or high people, their dreams were very important because they felt like that's how the gods were talking to them. So it was very important to not only to remember the dream, but actually get it interpreted. So here the guy has this dream, and he's telling it to this other guy about his dream. And it probably seemed kind of obvious to the second guard what was going on for a couple reasons. One, he says it's a cake of barley bread. So barley is the food of the poor. If you couldn't afford to eat wheat, you ate barley. Okay? So this kind of represented to him the condition of the Israelites because they're just suffering. Okay? They don't have good food, they just have the food of the poor. The fact that the cake is stale just shows their conditions. They don't even have good barley bread to eat. They just have junk. And when it runs into a tent, the tent is like the universal home of the Midianites. They're nomads. They don't stick around, in any one place for long. So they live their entire life in a tent. So he knows this is our universal home. This is where we live all the time. So it probably seemed kind of obvious to him. What the dream meant. And the fact that it completely destroys the tent, he probably feels like, oh yeah, this is not going to go well for us. That's another point. So anyways, moving on. So Gideon now goes back to his troops after hearing this message, after believing God and praising God for this sign. He goes back to his men and he says, okay, look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go and we're going to fight the Midianites. And he gives everybody a horn to hang around their neck. They have a sword, they have a jug, and they have a torch. And he tells them, light the torches, put them in the jug. When we get to the Midianite camp, we're going to spread out around them, and then you're going to do like I do. Smash the jar, and then we're going to blow the horn, and we're going to shout for the Lord and for Gideon. So he tells all his men what to do. So the 300 people, they fan out. They go out there and they fan out. And all at one time, they smash the jars, which suddenly the torches are all just, suddenly appear. And they start blowing the horns, and they start shouting for the Lord and for Gideon. At this point, the Midianites must have thought that they had been surrounded. They're at about what they call the second watch. So this was probably about midnight. So it's in the middle of the night. All of a sudden, you hear this loud crashing everywhere. All these torches just suddenly show up, and people are blowing horns and shouting. They went completely nuts. They completely panicked, and they start fighting each other just to try and get out of the area. So the Midianites are all just battling each other. Gideon's just sitting here watching this. And finally, the Midianites start to flee. At the end of all this chaos, there's only 15,000 Midianites left. So they pretty much did away with themselves. They didn't need the 300 just to show up and scare them. So the Midianites basically defeat themselves, and now they're on the run. Some more Israelites show up to help them out while the Midianites are in full retreat. And at this point, they capture the two generals of the Midianite army. So, fun fact, they're named Oreb and Zeb. Oreb means the raven, and Zeb means the wolf. And it's funny because one of the commentators said that it's actually ironically fitting because the Midianites had acted like scavengers and predators, so the names were ironically appropriate. Usually, princes and generals would pick names of birds and beasts, but since they were acting like scavengers, these were probably pretty good names for them. So they get them, they execute them, send them on their way, and now the Midianite army is in full retreat and everyone's chasing after them. So Gideon is now looking for the two kings of the Midianites, okay? So he's following them, he's following behind them, they're on camels, so they're going a lot faster than he is. So they're hightailing it out of town, and Gideon stops with his men at a town called Sukkoth, and he asks them for bread. He says, hey, my men are famished, can you please give us some bread? And the men of Sukkoth are like, no, we're not going to help you. We're going to let you, do what you got to do, but, there's no way. So then he goes to another town called Penuel, and he asks those men for bread, and they refuse him too. So now he's got to just take off. He has no supplies. What's interesting about this is both Sukkoth and Penuel are actually on the east side of the Jordan River. So probably what happened is that these guys had made a pact with the Midianites because they're the closest to them. So they're the ones that are always going to get, beaten up and have stuff taken. So they probably made a pact with the Midianites because the Midianites have to cross the Jordan, and to get there, you have to have safe travel. So this makes a nice beachhead for them to travel across the Jordan and not have to worry about people coming up behind them and going after them. So he threatens both the men of Sukkoth. He threatens to thresh the men of Sukkoth. And then he promises to pull down the tower of Penuel when he leaves. So the other thing, too, is not only would they probably had a treaty, there's also 15,000 Midianites that just went by, and this guy's got 300. So they're probably like, yeah, no, there's no way. You're not going to get these guys. So Gideon goes ahead, and he starts chasing after the Midianite kings. He catches the army, and he surprises them. They probably had stopped someplace just outside of Israel thinking, they'll never catch us here. Nope, Gideon gets them. So he surprises their army. It doesn't say that they fought or anything, but the two kings try to get away. So Gideon gets the two kings. So he captures them, and he takes them back to Sukkoth. But first he finds a young man from Sukkoth, and he interrogates him and finds out who the 77 leaders are of Sukkoth, and he brings the kings to them, and he says, see the two kings that you said I couldn't get? Here they are. So he takes the 77 leaders out and threshes them with desert briars. So probably as punishment for their treaty and the fact that they wouldn't help him defeat the Midianites and actually get rid of them permanently. So he goes ahead and he punishes them. He goes back to Penuel, and he pulls down the tower. He kills the men, and that's the end of them. Fun fact, our two kings are named Zalmunna and Zeba. I don't know if these are their actual names or if Hosea isn't actually the worst namer in the Bible. So Zalmunna actually can be translated as his shadow is withheld or deprived of protection. So it means that his God was not protecting him. So he had withdrawn his protection from this guy. The other guy, Zeba, his name literally in Hebrew means victim. Or it could mean sacrifice, depending on the context that you use the word. So these guys are being led with two generals, the wolf and the raven, who are being commanded by victim, and his protection is withheld. So it probably wasn't going to turn out to be a great scavenging event this time. But I don't know, and I don't know if that was actually their names or if somebody who wrote Hebrews thought that was funny to kind of maybe do a little wordplay. But I'll let you make of that what you want. So at this point, he's punished the men of Sukkoth, he's punished the men of Penuel, so now he turns his attention to the two kings, and basically he starts interrogating them. Apparently his brothers were killed previously, and so he knows that these two kings were involved with it, so he starts questioning them, and they start to go, oh yeah, we remember those guys. Yeah, they looked like the sons of kings. So it might have been their attempt to try and flatter him, but it probably wasn't a good take. But he's like, yeah, we remember those guys. They were like sons of kings, just like you, Gideon. And so he gets really angry because they remember killing those guys, so they probably weren't killed in battle. They were probably murdered afterwards, or during one of these raids, they had gathered people together and they just murdered them. So they weren't even allowed to be killed in battle. So Gideon gets really angry, and then he orders his young son to actually kill the kings. And so at this time, it was actually considered to be a real insult if a young child or a woman was to kill you, especially if you were a king or a person of high station, because it meant you couldn't defend yourself. It meant you were too weak to defend against them. So he wanted his young son to kill them as an insult to them. But his young son couldn't do it. He couldn't get the courage up to do it. So Gideon goes ahead and he kills the men himself and executes them. So at this point now the battle's over. The Midianites, they're out of Israel. Everything is nice and quiet now, and everybody's celebrating. There is a little bit of a tiff between him and another tribe where they got mad that he didn't call them in sooner, but he then tells them, hey, what have I really done? You guys killed the Oreb and Zeb. I hadn't even done that yet. So he finally gets the kings, and then he kills them. So at this point, everyone's all together, and they're all kind of celebrating. So Gideon is offered kingship by the men of Israel. So they're like, hey, you did a great job, man. You got rid of these guys. Be our king. And Gideon here he actually does the right thing. He says no. He realizes that God is their king and that he's the rightful ruler of them. So in verse 23, he actually tells them, I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. So here it is. I mean, like at the end of the battle, he does the right thing. He could have just said, yeah, make me the king. I want to be the guy in charge. But he doesn't. He does the right thing. So throughout the whole story, even though he was asking for signs, he was still doing the right thing. He was honoring God. He was doing what he was told to do, and he wasn't backing down. So, despite his fearfulness, he just kept doing the right thing. He kept not backing down and doing what God wanted him to do. But the story doesn't end quite as good as it probably should have. Because at the end, while the men are asking to be king, Gideon requests from them an earring from each of their spoils to be given to him. So all the men are like, yeah, sure, I got plenty. The Midianites, they all wore a gold earring. So 120,000 were wiped out in one night. So there was plenty of gold earrings to go around. So he asked for the gold earrings, and it basically amounts to about 40 to 75 pounds of gold, depending on how you weigh it. There's two different shekel weights that it could be. So it was either 40 or 75 pounds of gold. And what does he do? He decides to do something that he shouldn't have done. He makes a ephod out of the purple clothes of the king and the earrings. It's not exactly clear what is meant by the ephod. It could either be like the priestly garments worn by the Jewish priests, like he was basically saying, I'm going to take over the worship of God here. More likely, it was actually like an altar, an idol that he clothed with the purple robes and all of the earrings and did them up. So he goes ahead and he makes this idol, and he sets it up in his hometown of Ophrah. And again, the text's not clear exactly what it was, but after he makes this ephod, God says that wasn't really good. And in verse 27, we read, Gideon used all this to make an ephod, which he put in his hometown of Ophrah. All the Israelites prostituted themselves to it by worshiping it there. It became a snare to Gideon and his family. So here Gideon had this really good run. I mean, he was doing everything he was supposed to. He defeated the Midianites. He's done all these cool things. He's seen all these signs. And yet, at the very end, he starts to crash and burn and creates his own idol. The very problem that God sent him out to rid of from Israel, because that's why he was letting the Midianites attack them and take over stuff. So after this battle, the Midianites basically lose their appetite for destruction. They basically lose their appetite for Israel. They're horribly humiliated. They just don't want to come back and fight. So they don't have to worry about them. This actually touches off like 40 years of peace. Okay, so Israel goes from 7 years of just horrible conditions to 40 years of peace because of this battle. Gideon goes home and he settles down with his many wives and 70 sons. And he does have another son. His name is Abimelech, which I believe Daniel told me is my father is king. Yes, so he actually has a son with a concubine, and he names him Abimelech. My father is king, and but that's another part of the story, and that things go really bad when he comes around. But I'll let you read that for yourself. So, at any rate, he gets 40 years of peace, but they don't treat him very well. At this point, Israel forgets, oh yeah, this is the guy that saved us, and everyone goes back to the Baal worship. So here it was, they were being persecuted because of their Baal worship. They defeated the Midianites because God told them, stop worshiping the idols and then just go right back to it. So not a good thing. So what are some applications that we can pull out of this? Well, first one is God sees us differently than we see ourselves. We see ourselves for who we are. God sees us who we are and what we can accomplish. He literally called Gideon a courageous warrior while he's threshing wheat in a wine press. So he's as hidden as he can be, and he's calling him a courageous warrior because he knows he can do it. He knows that eventually he will be able to go and fight the Midianites. So even though you may not be where you want to be today, God sees the potential in you, and he knows where you can go with this. So God, all we see is our reality, and God sees our possibilities. Another thing is the father. Going along to get along is still wrong. So in order to appease his family, it looks like he was just going along with the Baal worship, like, build a pole, build an altar, do whatever you want. But he was the father, and he should have been telling them, no, you can't do this in my backyard. Take this junk out of here and get rid of it. But he went ahead and went along with it. So another application for us is, just because, we get along with somebody doesn't mean that we have to do the wrong thing. He could have done the right thing and stood up and said no. Because eventually, like Gideon didn't get killed by his family, so obviously he had some sort of sway over them to stop them. And when he told the men of the city, hey, let Baal fight his own battles, everyone kind of just dropped it. So he obviously had some sort of influence that he could have used to get rid of this. Another thing is Gideon was asked for and granted several signs before he actually attacked the Midianites. I don't think that it showed that he wasn't faithful. I think it just showed that he was extremely fearful. And God knew this. I mean, he gave him the fleece. He consumed the sacrifice. He turned the Midianite army against themselves, and they wiped out 120,000 of their own people. And he gave the dream to Gideon just so he would do it. But right after hearing these things, Gideon did the right thing. And when you have, things that are going on in your life and this is the way I'm supposed to go, that's the way you should be going. Following God, doing the right thing. And that's what Gideon did. At the end, after the battle, things took a slide because he built his own idol, which was very, very bad. So the last application is, even though you're doing things right now, and did things right in the past, and you're doing things right now, you still got to do things right in the future. So basically what you got to do is you got to start strong, stay strong, and finish strong, okay? Following God and doing the right thing. Gideon, unfortunately here, he did the wrong thing, and he built his own idol and went right back to the idol worship that they were all trapped up in. And so he created his own snare. He created his own trap for his own family. So start strong, stay strong, finish strong.